Darby's translation 1890. John 9. And as he passed on, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? Jesus answered, Neither has this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be manifested in him. I must work the works of him that has sent me while it is day. The night is coming, when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud of the spittle, and put the mud, as ointment, on his eyes. And he said to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is interpreted, sent. He went therefore and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors therefore, and those who used to see him before, that he was a beggar, said, Is not this he that was sitting and begging? Some said, It is he, others said, No, but he is like him. He said, It is I. They said therefore to him, How have thine eyes been opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made mud and anointed mine eyes, and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash, and having gone and washed, I saw. They said therefore to him, Where is he? He says, I do not know. They bring him who was before blind to the Pharisees. Now it was Sabbath when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. The Pharisees therefore also again asked him how he received his sight. And he said to them, He put mud upon mine eyes, and I washed, and I see. Some of the Pharisees therefore said, This man is not of God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, How can a sinful man perform such signs? And there was a division among them. They say therefore again to the blind man, What dost thou say of him, that he has opened thine eyes? And he said, He is a prophet. The Jews therefore did not believe concerning him that he was blind and had received sight, until they had called the parents of him that had received sight. And they asked them, saying, This is your son, of whom ye say that he was born blind, how then does he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know, or who has opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak concerning himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be the Christ, he should be excommunicated from the synagogue. On this account his parents said, He is of age, ask him. They called therefore a second time the man who had been blind, and said to him, Give glory to God, we know that this man is sinful. He answered therefore, If he is sinful I know not. One thing I know, that, being blind before, now I see. And they said to him again, What did he do to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I told you already, and ye did not hear, why do ye desire to hear again? Do ye also wish to become his disciples? They railed at him, and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as to this man, we know not whence he is. The man answered and said to them, Now and this is a wonderful thing, that ye do not know whence he is, and he has opened mine eyes. But we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone be God-fearing and do his will, him he hears. Since time was, it has not been heard that anyone opened the eyes of one born blind. If this man were not of God, he would be able to do nothing. They answered and said to him, Thou hast been wholly born in sins, and thou teachest us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said to him, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, And who is he, Lord, that I may believe on him? And Jesus said to him, Thou hast both seen him, and he that speaks with thee is he. And he said, I believe, Lord, and he did him homage. And Jesus said, For judgment am I come into this world, that they which see not may see, and they which see may become blind. And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things, and they said to him, Are we blind also? Jesus said to them, If you were blind you would not have sin, but now ye say, We see, your sin remains. John 9. By F. B. Hole. The murderous intentions of the Jews did not fail because they lacked fixity of purpose, but because he was beyond their reach until his hour was come. Hiding himself from them, Jesus left the temple, and as he passed on he encountered a blind man who was to bear striking witness to the leaders of Israel, and in his own person become another sign that here amongst them was indeed the Christ, the Son of God. The question which the disciples raised may seem curious to us, but it expressed thoughts which were common among the Jews, finding their basis in Exodus 20 verse 5, which speaks of the iniquity of the fathers being visited upon the children. The Lord's reply shows that affliction may come without there being any element of retribution in it, but simply in order that God's work may be manifested. It was manifested here in working a complete deliverance from the affliction. It may just as strikingly be manifested by complete deliverance from the depression and weight of the affliction, while the affliction itself still persists, and so it is often seen today. It was then the day, marked by the presence on earth of the light of the world. Jesus knew that the night of his rejection and death was approaching, but until that time he was here to do the Father's works, and this blind man was a fit subject for the work of God, though he had made no appeal for it, as far as the record goes. The action taken by the Lord was symbolic, as is shown by the name of the pool being interpreted for us. Jesus was the sent one, who had become flesh, and of his flesh the clay mixed with his spittle was the symbol. Now seeing eyes would be blinded if plastered with clay, and blind eyes rendered doubly blind. Just so it was for the spiritually blind. The flesh of the Word was a stumbling block, and they saw only the carpenter's son. For us who believe in him as the sent one, the reverse is true. It is by his revelation in flesh that we have come to know him, as 1 John 1 verses 1 to 2 shows. His flesh is darkness to the world, it is light to us. We can adopt the language in a spiritual sense and say we washed and came seeing. The rest of the chapter shows that the blind man got the eyes of his heart opened as well as the eyes of his head. Once his spiritual eyes were opened, his measure of light increased. The very opposition he encountered served to produce the increase. The questioning of the neighbors sprang from curiosity rather than opposition, and it served to bring out the simple facts with which he started. He knew how his eyes were opened and that he owed it to a man called Jesus, though his whereabouts he knew not. His case was so remarkable that they brought him to the Pharisees, and here at once the antagonistic spirit prevailed. There was no difficulty in finding ground for their opposition, for the miracle had been wrought on the Sabbath. Again Jesus had broken the Sabbath, and this at once condemned him in their eyes. To fail in this matter of ceremonial observance was fatal. He could not be of God, a conclusion quite typical of the Pharisaic mind. Others, however, were more impressed by the miracle, and so a division was again manifested, which led them to ask the man what he had to say of him. His reply showed that the man called Jesus was to him at least a prophet. This was more than they would admit, so they questioned the truth of his miraculous cure. The parents were now called into the discussion, only to testify that he was indeed born blind, so his cure was beyond question, though fear led them to refer all further inquiry to the man himself, and the fact comes out that the verdict of the Pharisees on the case was a foregone conclusion. Anyone confessing Jesus to be the Christ was to be excluded from all the religious privileges of Judaism. Thus their base motives stood revealed, and they pursued their examination of the man not to elicit the truth but to discover some possible ground for condemning either Jesus or the man, or both. Would he ascribe the praise to God, while agreeing that the man by whom God's power was exercised was a sinner? The man avoided this subtle trap by simply affirming again the one point as to which he was immovably certain. Like a skillful general who declines battle on ground chosen by the enemy and will only meet the foe in his own impregnable position, so he declined mere theological discussion, in which he was no match for them, and took his stand on what he knew had been wrought in himself. The man's words in verse 25 are full of instruction for us. The unlettered plowboy of today can humbly yet boldly confront the numerous counterparts of both Pharisees and Sadducees, if content just to testify of that which the grace of God has done for him and in him. Next they attempted to extract from the man more exact details of the method Jesus employed, if perchance they might find a point of attack. By now, however, he had perceived their antagonism, and his question, "Will ye also be his disciples?" had in it a touch of sarcasm. This stung them to the point of losing their tempers, so much so that while declaring their adherence to Moses they committed themselves to a declaration of ignorance as to the origin and credentials of Jesus. They took the agnostic attitude, just as so many do today. This, however, was a fatal admission. The loss of their tempers was followed by the loss of their case from an argumentative point of view. The simple believer, if he sticks to the foundation facts as to which he can bear witness, will suffer no defeat when he encounters the agnostic. These Pharisees, who posed as the supreme religious authorities of the day, not only professed ignorance as to this most vital question, but also demanded a verdict on the question wholly contrary to the evidence. Beneficent power had undeniably operated, working deliverance from evil. They professed ignorance of its source, yet demanded that he who wielded it should be denounced as a sinner. The man, however, had felt the action of the power, he knew it was of God, and the wicked opposition he encountered only helped him to the further conclusion that Jesus himself was of God indeed. Having lost their case and failed to corrupt the thoughts of the man, they resorted to violence and cast him out. As regards Judaism, he was excommunicated. Was there anything for the poor man except heathenism with its blank darkness? Yes, there was. Jesus himself was morally outside it already. From the outset of this gospel he has been so viewed, as we have remarked before, though he was not outside it in the fullest sense till he was led outside the gate of Jerusalem to die the malefactor's death. In verse 35 we see the rejected Savior finding the rejected man and propounding to him the greatest of questions, "Dost thou believe on the Son of God?" The question reached him in an abstract form. The man hesitated, for he wished the Son of God to be before him in concrete shape. Where should he find him, that he might believe? Thus challenged, Jesus plainly presented himself as the Son of God. The man at once, and as plainly, accepted him as such in faith, and worshipped him. So once more we are conducted to the main point of this gospel as expressed in verse 31 of chapter 20. The man had been led step by step to the faith of the Son of God and to life in his name, and the opening of his physical eyes had been a sign of the greater work of opening the eyes of his mind and heart. In verse 39 we have the comment of the Lord on the whole scene. He had come into the world for judgment, not in the sense of condemning men, but as producing a discrimination that cut down beneath surface appearances and reached men as they really were. Some, like this man, had their eyes open to see the truth. Others who professed to be the seeing ones, like the Pharisees, might be blinded and manifested as being blind. Some Pharisees who were present suspected that he referred to them, and their question gave an opportunity for their perilous position to be shown. Their sin lay in their hypocrisy. They had intellectual sight yet were spiritually blind, and their sin remained, whereas those really blind, and confessedly so, are rather objects of compassion.